the most challenging was
All right, we are live
and
on Facebook.
Oh my God.
Paula Toledo, an incredible story. So glad you're here, Paula.
Thanks for having
And
me.
we're going to be on the air very soon. And Paula's recording Facebook Live too. The fancy tripod. We got to get ourselves one of those.
No, this one's just my camera. I wish I had a remote control that I could, like, you know?
Yeah, use your little selfie stick.
We need a drone.
All right, we should be on soon. We're going to hear Let It Be. You probably won't be able to hear it, but you'll be able to hear it through the speakers.
Or join us for a great breakfast at St. Peter Bagel on Monkland Avenue in NDG. Call 487-8051. That's
We're getting there. We got it all done.
When it's time to buy or lease a Nissan.
And you, Corey, you're doing the introduction, right?
Yes.
Like after our banter.
Yeah.
It's Nissan's car event. Stop shopping around.
Well, he longer. He had Stephanie Erickson, you know, her.
Oh,
Yes,
right.
was with Matt, and a colleague and friend of mine, and they and Stephanie. I had been on the show, and Stephanie had decided that she wanted to try other avenues.
Yeah.
So Matt was like, I had been on the show and met him, and so I had said to him, I love doing this. If you ever need someone, and literally 2 weeks later,
Here we go.
Said,
Showtime.
it's about a year.
And welcome back to Life Unrehearsed. I'm Matt Del Vecchio, specializing in free retirement, home search, and senior transition support. In studio here with Corey Sirota, clinical social worker and psychotherapist specializing in grief and loss. You familiar with that song, Let It Be, Corey? I heard you saw Paul McCartney Thursday night. How was it?
I'm surprised you didn't hear me singing from the concert. Oh my gosh, it was. The truth is, it's my daughter who's a huge Beatle fan. Of course, my husband and I are Beatle fans, but my daughter is. So when he was coming in, she said, I have to go. And she wasn't sure who. I said, I will go with you. And then it turned out that Andy said, I will go with you. So we went. Now, we were sitting, you know what the term the gods are? I could have high-fived God from where I was sitting, but it was well worth it. I don't know if I enjoyed seeing him or watching my daughter watch the show.
Oh, that's so good.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
this was a bucket list for her. I heard 2 hours, 45 minutes without a break.
Yeah.
Well, good for him.
Wow.
Good for him. Corey, we've got a great guest coming up.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of Let It Be, nobody more than Paula Toledo had to learn how to let things be. Given her background and her story, we are very grateful to have Paula Toledo here with us in studio. She had a devastating experience with her husband who died by suicide, which led her to have to turn her life, as you can imagine, completely around. And what she's done, based on her experiences, she's now become a professional speaker. She continues to inspire tons of people who are experiencing grief and loss. So welcome to the show, Paula.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome, Paula. Thanks for being with us.
I was very a little bit suspect when I was giving the introduction because I wanted to let you tell the story. And so would you mind starting by telling the story and your subsequent journey?
For sure. Well, I grew up in Montreal, but I moved to Vancouver in '93 with the love of my life, who was my college sweetheart. And we lived together for many, many, many years. And he lived with anxiety, but was very high functioning. And he was very successful. We had a great community around us. He was very in tune with his health and his well-being. And about a couple of months before my second son was born, he fell very ill. His anxiety escalated, and he fell into a major depressive episode. And he was hospitalized and on medications. And I accompanied him during his journey. And unfortunately, 2 weeks after my youngest son was born, he died by way of suicide. So it was life completely unrehearsed, but life rehearsed in a way, because everything that I'd experienced in my life, to growing up with the parents that I grew up with who were so focused on mind, body, and spirit, to meeting my late husband Pierre, who taught me about wonder and curiosity and adventure and compassion, to working as a brand marketer and to becoming a singer-songwriter and a storyteller, and now I do content for compassion. So that was how I ended up doing the TEDx talk and hoping to inspire other people that are working through adversity, because I think, you know, there's death, but there's loss in so many facets of life.
For sure.
So that's my story, and
It's an incredible story. It's, you know, we're talking about overcoming grief and loss with mental health advocate and motivational speaker Paula Toledo. Can't possibly imagine losing a spouse, children 2 weeks old and 2 years old. But this has brought you through. That was what, 8 years ago, if I'm not mistaken.
That was almost 9 years ago.
9 years ago.
9 years ago in October.
You've been on a 9-year journey here, and I'm sure you've had your ups and downs, especially towards the beginning. Tell us a little bit of how you've been able to cope with it, and I'd like specifically for you to mention your Ode to Wonder, which I find fascinating.
Right. So when my late husband, when he died by suicide, my mom at the same time was tragically fighting her last days of cancer. So I moved back home to Montreal to introduce my youngest son to her. She was waiting for his birth, and a couple of months later, she died. So I was dealing with the death of my husband, of my mother. My father had passed on 2 years prior, and I was nursing a newborn. I was completely sleep deprived, and every waking hour I was in the hospital trying to visit my mom. So it was, and I should back up also, 2 weeks after, well, about a week after I gave birth to my youngest son, I almost died as well. There was placenta left in me, and I had tremendous blood loss. I ended up back in the hospital overnight with blood transfusions. So it was a very, very difficult time for me. And I remember thinking, how am I going to get through this? Like, how does one get through this? And when I was strong enough, I went to see this therapist, and he just gave me one piece of advice. He said, well, what has helped you through difficult times in the past?
Right.
And I said, well, I used to meditate, but now I don't have time to meditate. I don't have time for anything other than sleeping and eating and nursing my newborn. And he said, well, what anything? And I said, I guess I could try to meditate. And he said, yeah, you can do mindfulness while you're nursing your son. So that helped me, and that started becoming a bit of a bridge to what I now have as 4 pillars in my life to help me stay well mentally, because I do believe that we focus so much on our physical well-being, but we forget about our mental well-being. We forget that we should do it every day.
So can we elaborate on those 4 pillars? Because I know them, but I'd love for you to share them with everyone.
Well, at that time, I was very isolated. So I didn't have any friends in Montreal. My parents were gone. I did have my family who were taking good care of me, my brothers and sisters. But I didn't have the luxury to leave the house. So there were just, 4 things that I could do within the realm of my 4 walls that I had control and power over. And that's the big thing when you're working through adversities, to feel that you have control somehow of your life. And so those 4 pillars are humanity, so that's paying it forward or being a service for others. Arts and awareness, so that was my meditation and engaging in the arts because I'm an artist. Travel, which doesn't necessarily mean going away to Barcelona like I did this summer, but discovery. So discovering something new.
It could even be in your local neighborhood.
It could be on the internet,
cafe.
Something that actually charges you. And the last one is sports and nature. So to engaging in something that gets your blood pumping and being in nature.
And those 4 pillars, you have an acronym for that. It's
HATS.
It's right? HATS. Humanity, arts and awareness, travel, and sports and
nature.
So
I call it my hats off mental wellness regime that I try to do one every day, or if not all, because it's a self-compassion regime of mental well-being. And hats off saying, it's job well done, because you're kind of patting yourself on the back.
As I don't think we do enough of.
Yes.
And also how you pointed out that you don't have to do all 4.
Exactly. You can do one. It could just be like an act of kindness.
Yeah.
And you talked about self-compassion. You've mentioned it a few times. We're going to head out to traffic soon, though, Paula. But you've described it as being one of the most important things you can do for your mental well-being. Period. Just this self-compassion. So we want to hear a little bit more about that. But first, we're going to head out to my buddy Mark Shaloub in the CJD Traffic Center. How's traffic out there, Mark?
Well, we got that in. That's good.
Yeah. What was the noise? Was that your phone?
That was
I was just trying to turn it off because my messenger was bumping in. Hold on.
Best to just shut it off.
Yeah, that's what I was
figured as much.
Yeah.
I figured I should shut you off as much.
Yeah. Well, last week we had my daughter on,
Oh my gosh.
and she swore on the radio.
Did she? Can I just put this outside?
Yes, yes, you can.
Interesting question.
Pull hard. Pull hard. Yeah. Okay, so we're good?
We're good.
Yeah, right?
Yeah,
You put it, you tucked it away.
Should
Yeah.
you see her stepping on it?
That's good.
Throw it out the
Facebook
window.
Live, though. We got her all. That's all right. Yeah, her daughter said shitty on the air.
Yeah.
Really?
Last year. She was, oh my God.
Yeah.
I thought she was going to report. I just said shitty.
Yeah.
You don't have the.
And so her friends are like that was their favorite part.
Oh my gosh.
Okay. So we're going to be on around 4:50. Another 3-4 minutes.
Okay.
I'll come on with the teaser question
Yeah.
about self-compassion. If you
Okay.
could describe that a little bit more.
Sure.
And then we're going to have about 5 minutes, not
Yeah.
much more.
Goes by fast, right?
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
And we still have
so you're
tons
like,
of questions.
Wait. Every
Yeah.
time I've done it,
Yeah.
done an interview. I'm like, I bet I didn't say anything.
I
Like I said hi,
Yeah.
and now you're saying thanks so much for That's why we don't take phone calls anymore,
Right.
because imagine adding
Yes.
in phone calls. To
Yeah,
that.
oh, I
You'd
can't
Really
imagine.
say
Just goes
nothing.
too quick.
can't imagine.
So, if you had to pinpoint the things that you would really want out there, because you've got the 4 pillars out there, and you're going to talk about self-compassion. What else? We do want to give you a chance, I guess, to talk about the Montreal Walks for mental health. So
Yeah,
we'll be able to do that.
What we
in
did
question.
talk about, though, is it's going to be a mention of, she's Paula's a participant in it,
Right.
but it would be more important for Paula to plug herself at the end with a
Yeah.
thank you. So it'll just
Okay.
be a quick mention of that.
Okay.
I
But the
started
TEDx talks
yes.
would be nice,
And I
right?
started a group too on my Ode to Wonder Facebook page. It's Ode to Wonder Resiliency.
Okay.
So you could mention that in the
yes.
thank yous,
Yeah.
right? Okay.
Because we're going to say how people get it. So you can do this. There's the number. Here's the Facebook. Here's the,
Right.
you can be part of whatever. You go to town.
Okay.
So I'll probably ask about the loss, the different types of losses.
I think that's important because
Yes.
we're not associating necessarily suicide and death.
Right.
You know, it's
Yeah.
loss in general, stress,
Yeah.
anxiety,
So I'm going to.
and that's perfect for you, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So you handle that. That'll
Yeah.
be right after the self-compassion
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
And then maybe we'll have time to talk TEDx.
Right.
And then we're going to be.
How did that
Yeah.
go?
It went really well. Yeah. It was,
Who was your coach? Was it Derek?
It was Derek.
It was
yeah,
Derek,
he's
yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
He is
amazing.
amazing.
And
I was
so-
with him at the awards, the LinkedIn
Yes.
awards.
Yes. I wish I knew more about. Like I saw all these things pop up on Facebook. I wasn't sure what it was though. The awards.
Yeah.
I saw all these people being nominated.
Yeah.
Jamie Benezri is your guy.
Okay.
That's the guy you got to meet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've spoken. over
Marco's
the phone.
commercials on Marco Vanderbini.
And
But for the
maybe,
expertise
don't ask
we
his
bring
name.
when life events
Oh, I
occur,
got some
retirement,
info
sale of
on
business,
Orla
loss of a loved
and
one,
Andrea
and transitions.
about the sponsorship and all that. Yeah,
Okay.
it's good stuff. No, it's good
Oh,
stuff.
it's good
Actually,
stuff.
yeah.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Do they have some ideas? They said they had some ideas of potential guests too.
Yeah, I said
That's great.
we're booked for 2 months.
Yeah.
Both their jaws dropped. What? We don't know what the hell we're doing next week.
Yeah. We're fortunate.
Do you need
very,
more
very
guests?
fortunate. Right now,
guys are-
we're booked for 2 months.
Wow.
Yeah, we're which is rare. I mean,
Yeah.
but we're booked for 2 months, end of October.
Yeah.
Even mid-October,
Yeah.
mid-November.
Yeah.
So that's good. It's gives us a bit of a.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So busy, right?
And you're doing well. I mean, just listening to
Yeah.
your.
Am I
You have a
going?
lot.
No,
No,
you're
terrific.
you just
No.
like we're entranced. It's like
Oh,
okay, what are you gonna say next? Oh, here we go. And yes, the show must go on. Welcome back to Life Unrehearsed. Matt Del Vecchio here with Corey Sirota, and we're talking to mental health advocate who had to deal with the suicide of her husband 8 years ago when her 2 children were just 2 years old and 2 weeks old. An amazing woman, Paula Toledo, telling us about how she's gone through this journey and is the inspiration to thousands of people. And Paula, thank you for being on the show again with us. Just before traffic, we talked about this term you use quite often called self-compassion. And you know, you're even saying that this is probably one of the most significant things we can do for ourselves concerning mental well-being. So can you explain self-compassion?
Well, for me, self-compassion is really just taking the time to recognize that you're working through something difficult, but not beating yourself up for what you're going through. And I think for a lot of survivors, people that have died by way of suicide, for a lot of caregivers, for anyone experiencing loss or adversity, we can often look at ourselves and go, well, that was my fault, or there was something that I did that caused that to happen. And self-compassion is just recognizing that this event happened, but you don't tear yourself apart over it. And I do believe that you can't really have compassion for other people until you have compassion for yourself. So for me, it was really healing that. I spent a lot of time healing that. And whenever you get that thought in your head that, oh, I should have done this, or it was my fault that the shoulds, it's like a radio station, I just switch it. Yeah. I turn it off.
Unless you're on CJAD.
Unless you're on CJAD.
Yeah. Well, I say you stop being should on.
Yeah.
But I want to actually expand. That's such an important point, but I want to expand as a grief counselor myself. I don't only see, this is your work that you're doing is much more than just I don't want to minimize it, but the fact that your husband died by suicide. You work with and recognize loss as much bigger, as do I. There's all kinds of loss that people experience, and the work you're doing really does speak to many in all different kinds of contexts. So also, would you then please elaborate on how you see or how you define loss?
Right, because
Yes.
like you were saying before, it could be anxiety, stress, depression, grief,
Loss of direction, loss
Absolutely.
of relationship, moving, any unwelcome change, as I call it.
That's the one universal thing, is that we all experience loss. And so my older brother, lives with schizophrenia. He has a mental illness, and I lost my brother, the brother that I knew when I was in high school, and he was in his 20s. And so that was my first big loss, that the brother that I knew completely changed, and I had to face this new perspective of living with a brother that was different from how he was growing up with me. So there was the loss of that. There could be loss of, people often, when I speak about my children and talk about their loss, they say, well, how could they experience loss? They were 2 weeks old and 2 years old. And I said, well, they have a loss of a dream.
That's right.
They have a loss of a dream, of a future, of having a father in their life. And that's a massive loss. So yeah, they may not remember him, but that is a big loss. And if I, as a mother, weren't to recognize and acknowledge that, that would be such a big, big wound for them, a big, huge pain and suffering for them. So I think just the fact that I acknowledge that is, it helps them in their journey.
So important.
Absolutely.
You're listening to Paula Toledo here on Life Unrehearsed. She's a mental health advocate and motivational speaker. And just listening to you, I understand why you're a motivational speaker, Paula. And speaking of that, you are a TedX talk speaker. Tell us about one you just did not so long ago.
Right, that was in May of this year. And it was a big challenge because for obvious reasons it was very emotional. But I really believed that wonder helped me heal, and it was also the bridge that crushes stigma. That was the title of the talk. Wonder is the bridge that crushes stigma. Because I think that if we can open our eyes to see that things could be different, that people could be different, that leads to compassion. And compassion in the end crushes stigma. You can't have stigma with compassion. So that was one aspect of wonder. And the second aspect of wonder was seeing mental illness through the eyes of my children, because I, when they were old enough, had to explain to them what happened to their father and that he had a mental illness. And so I had to explain things in age-appropriate ways. As they got older, I'd explain a little bit more and a little bit more until I could explain suicide to them. But it was really this process of me seeing things through childlike eyes, very innocently and matter-of-factly, and really distilling it down to the truths of the science and without the stigma. And that was so compelling for me, because I realized that if I can do this, if my children can learn about this through me and through wonder, and I can learn about it through wonder, then everybody can learn about it with that same lens and be able to really see that, there's no reason that this stigma should exist.
I couldn't agree with you more. We talk a lot about in the work I do with children about helping them, wondering with them. We talk about doing that with them. So can you speak a little bit? You have a Facebook page, a group called Ode to Wonder?
Ode to Wonder. I have a blog called Ode to Wonder. I have a podcast, and I feature people that have gone through adversity who are extremely resilient, because during my hard time when I was trying to find ways to make it through, I saw a lot of websites that took me to a darker place. I wanted to share hope. So this is a place where I share hope about positive mental well-being. I've got a Facebook page called Ode to Wonder that also has a group called Ode to Wonder Resiliency.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Paula, for everything that you
Thank you,
shared with
Paula.
us, for your courage to come on the show and to show people that even though life happens, there is hope, there's a light. How can people get a hold of you?
They can find me on Instagram, and my handle is Ode to Wonder. Facebook, my personal page is Paula M. Toledo. And they can go to my website, odetowonder.com.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Next week on Life Unrehearsed, please join us as we're going to be talking about something called Mind Strong and Youth Strong, two very important initiatives for adults and children for dealing with mental health. And we are also very pleased, Corey, we're excited to have our next guest next week, Dina Pastanji, an incredible woman who had a massive stroke at the young age of 29 years old. She's 35 now. You won't believe some of the things she's doing. You can catch that show next week and every Sunday on Life Unrehearsed on CJD 800 at 4 p.m.
That's a wrap.
Thank you
That's a wrap.
so
Thank
much.
you, Paula.
Thank you very
Excellent.
much.
Your TEDx talk
Yeah.
conversation was good. You
Thank
were
you.
right in the zone. And I'm so compelled about your kids. Like, I can't possibly imagine, having to have these discussions.
Yeah, well,
And I
people
guess it's
make the
ongoing.
mistake, though, people make the mistake of not wanting to, right? They
Yeah.
want to shelter them
Yes.
from adversity so they don't talk about it. And what are they doing? They're essentially leaving their kids to come up with their own answers and their own explanations, and they can be very creative about that.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that's...
And I what was the woman's name that started the grief groups? Dawn.
Don Crochet, yeah.
So I met with her very early on, and I was like, how do I do this?
Yeah.
And she gave me that advice. And she said,
Yeah.
age appropriate, only
Yeah.
answer the questions that they're asking you on a need-to-know basis.
Mhm.
Don't elaborate too much. And so I had to kind of, unravel the story very slowly over the years. 'Cause they-
Only as much as they could take.
yes.
Fair
Yes.
enough.
Yeah, but as a result, and I talk about it in the TED Talk, I lived in isolation for a long time because I didn't want to tell any adults the full story in the event that they told their kids, and the kids would
Right,
bring
yeah,
it to
'cause
my
how
kids.
do you want them
Having
to
to
hear?
hide
Who do
that,
you
yeah.
want them to hear?
Yes, so it was very...
Paula, you were a champ.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Jay,
Matt.
thanks for being
Thanks,
here.
Corey.
Bye bye.
Sorry about
We
the
were able
blue.
to
Sorry
do
about
that.
Siri.